She sold my childhood home? I blinked at the man holding a clipboard. 2 months ago. Cash deal, he repeated. But it got worse. The buyer was Carol Whitman, Dad's so-called friend, the same woman who'd been answering his phone, deleting his messages. And now? She owned everything. The house, his accounts, his power of attorney. And my father? Missing. No call. No goodbye. Just gone. I stood on that porch, the home sweet home mat, still under my feet, and realized she hadn't just taken the house, she'd taken him. But Carol made one mistake. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She doesn't know I flew 12 hours with every receipt, every document, and a fire in my chest. And I'm about to burn her whole scheme down. My name is Lauren Bennett, and I'm 45 years old. Since my divorce, I've been living in a small apartment in Seattle, trying to piece together what stability means. My father, Richard, has always been my anchor, especially after losing my mother, Janet, when I was young. Our family home in Portland held decades of Sunday traditions, roasted chicken dinners where my father would tuck little notes into my mother's old recipe books. But his friend Carol, who started as a neighbor 5 years ago, has been making strange comments lately about managing his affairs. My spine stiffens every time she calls, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What Carol doesn't know is that I've kept every email, every document, every date, filed and copied with a lawyer's precision. But let me start from the beginning. After 12 hours in a cramped airplane seat, my taxi finally pulled up to the curb of my childhood home. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times during the flight. Dad's booming laugh, his bear hug that always lasted a few seconds too. Long, maybe even the smell of his signature pot roast waiting inside. The late afternoon sun caught the familiar brass numbers beside the front door. 4827 Maple Drive. Home. I wheeled my beaten-up suitcase across the uneven sidewalk, noticing the grass needed cutting. Dad was usually meticulous about lawn care. He taught me how to edge a garden bed when I was 12, showing me how to angle the spade just right. Something felt off, but I pushed the thought away. He was probably just busy with retirement stuff. The porch steps creaked under my feet, same old melody they'd played for 30 years. I reached for the doorbell, already smiling. But instead of my father's familiar silhouette through the frosted glass, a stranger opened the door. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you?" His tone was professionally neutral. "I'm here to see Richard Bennett," I said, the smile frozen on my face. "I'm his daughter, Lauren." He glanced down at his clipboard. "I'm Victor Alvarez, the property manager. Mr. Bennett sold this house 2 months ago. Cash deal." The word "sold" hit me like a physical blow. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handle until the plastic bit into my palm. "That's impossible. This is my father's house." "Not anymore, ma'am." Victor flipped through his papers. "The sale closed on March 15th. I can show you the lockbox code if you'd like to verify." "No, there has to be some mistake." My voice sounded strange in my ears. "Did he leave a forwarding address? A phone number?" Victor shook his head. "Nothing on file. The sale went through a private agent." I stepped backward onto that creaking top step, my legs unsteady. The house looked different now. The white trim I'd helped Dad repaint last summer seemed garish, the windows dark and unfamiliar. I fumbled for my phone, hitting speed dial 1. "Hi, you've reached Richard Bennett. Please leave a message." His voicemail greeting was the same one he'd recorded years ago. I could hear the smile in his voice, the slight pause before the beep. "Dad, it's Lauren. I'm standing outside the house. Someone's telling me you sold it. Please call me back, please." My voice cracked on the last word. I stared at the living room window, half expecting to see him there in his favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking up to wave me inside. But the curtains were drawn tight. "Mr. Alvarez," I said, turning back to the property manager. "Who signed the deed? Who bought the house?" He consulted his clipboard again. The buyer's name is listed as Carol Whitman. Carol. The name meant nothing then, just another stranger in a day already full of them. Above us, the motion sensor clicked, and the porch light flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the welcome mat where Home Sweet Home was still clearly visible beneath my feet. The evening was settling in around us, and I stood frozen between the familiar past and an uncertain future, not ready to decide what came next. "Would you like me to show you the property?" Victor asked, his professional mask softening slightly. Though I should mention the new owner has already started renovations inside. Renovations. The word made my stomach lurch. How many layers of our family's life had already been stripped away? How many memories painted over? The Desert Inn Motel wasn't exactly 5-star accommodation, but it was the closest place to Dad's house. Correction, the house that used to be Dad's. I sat cross-legged on the squeaky bed, my phone in one hand and laptop balanced on my knees. The ancient air conditioner rattled and wheezed against the midnight rain, creating a weird symphony with the water hitting the parking lot outside. You know that feeling when you're so tired you should sleep, but your mind won't let you? That was me, hitting redial for what felt like the 100th time. Dad's voicemail greeting had become a cruel loop. "Hi, you've reached Richard Bennett." Click. Redial. "Hi, you've reached..." Finally, an automated message cut in. "This number has blocked further calls from your device." "Fine," I muttered, switching to my laptop. "Let's see what the county records have to say." The public records website was about as user-friendly as a brick wall, but I'd done enough research in my accounting job to know my way around. I started with the basics. Richard Bennett, date of birth February 12, 1948. Phone number matched what I had. Then I hit the property records. The sale documents were right there in black and white. Our family home, sold 2 months ago for cash, well below market value. My stomach clenched. Who sells a house that fast, that cheap? I dug deeper, downloading every PDF I could find. The pattern emerged like a connect-the-dots picture I didn't want to see. Dad's checking account? Closed. Investment portfolio? Liquidated. Even his beloved classic car, collection, 3 vintage Chevys he'd restored himself, sold at auction. "Jesus, Dad," I whispered, highlighting transaction dates with trembling hands. "What did they make you do?" That's when I saw it. A signature I didn't recognize, elegant and flowing, appearing alongside Dad's increasingly shaky handwriting on document after document. A cosigner. I circled it in red, the pen pressing so hard it nearly tore the paper. The rain intensified, drumming against the window like it was trying to get my attention. I grabbed my phone again, this time pulling up contacts for Dad's neighbors. The Hendersons next door, straight to voicemail. The Patels across the street, same thing. Mrs. Rodriguez, 2 houses down, actually picked up, but only to tell me she'd been in Florida visiting her daughter. "But I did see a moving truck," she added. "Early morning, maybe 3 weeks ago. Very quiet about it, not like Richard at all." I thanked her and hung up, my mind rewinding to the last time I'd actually spoken to Dad. It was a short call, just before my divorce was finalized. He'd sounded distracted, distant, and there had been someone in the background, Carol, always Carol lately, saying something about keeping it simple. The motel's digital clock flipped to 2 a.m., its red numbers reflecting off the rain-streaked window. My initial anxiety had hardened into something else, something with edges. I clicked back through the PDFs until I found the co-signature line again, zooming in until the typed name beneath it filled my screen. Thunder cracked outside, rattling the cheap blackout curtains. But it wasn't the thunder that made my throat tighten. It was the name staring back at me. Carol Whitman, power of attorney. The same Carol who'd been helping Dad with his finances. The same Carol who always seemed to be there when I called. The same Carol who now owned my childhood home. I spread the printed papers across the bed, connecting dates and signatures like a detective in one of those crime shows. The story they told was clear. Someone had systematically stripped my father of everything he owned, and that someone had a name. The air conditioner sputtered and died, leaving me in silence, broken only by the rain. I stared at Carol's signature until my vision blurred, the elegant loops becoming snakes on the page. I jerked awake to gray light seeping through the curtains, my mouth tasting like I'd been chewing coffee grounds. Must have dozed off sometime after 3, hunched over those documents. My back felt like origami gone wrong. You ever have one of those moments where you know, deep in your gut, that opening an envelope is going to change everything? That's what I felt, staring at the bank letter that housekeeping had slipped under my door. The Wells Fargo logo glared up at me, official and final. The room still smelled like last night's takeout as I tore into the envelope, hands steady despite the sleep deprivation. Funny how your body goes into autopilot when your world's falling apart. Dear Mr. Bennett, it began. Standard form letter stuff, until it wasn't. This notice confirms your estate designation change, effective 3 months prior. As requested, all accounts and associated powers now list Carol Whitman as primary beneficiary, with full authority over asset transfers, and the word beneficiary seemed to grow on the page, swallowing everything else. The room tilted like a funhouse mirror, and I had to grip the cheap particle board desk to stay upright. This can't be legal, I muttered, already reaching for my phone. The bank's customer service line rang twice before connecting me to someone who sounded about 12. I'm sorry, ma'am, the voice chirped after I explained the situation. Due to privacy restrictions, we can't discuss another person's accounts, even for family members. But I'm his daughter, I insisted, uncapping a pen with my teeth and flipping open a spiral notebook. Richard Bennett is my father. Without power of attorney or power of attorney, I cut in. Carol Whitman. That's who has it, right? A pause. I can't confirm or deny that information. I documented the call in my notebook. Date, time, representative's name, Kevin, and his careful non-answer. Old habits from my accounting days die hard, I guess. Every denial leaves a paper trail if you know how to track it. My laptop whirred to life, and I pulled up Facebook. Carol's profile was public. Rookie mistake on her. Part. I scrolled past dozens of posts, each one making me sicker than the last. The timestamps told their own story. Each post lined up perfectly with another piece of Dad's life being dismantled. I printed everything, watching the pages stack up like evidence at a crime scene. That old photo of Dad's Chevy collection, posted the same day they went to auction, his garden tools donated to the church. There's Carol, grinning next to a pile of rakes and shovels. Remember when I said I was meticulous? Well, each printout went into its own plastic sleeve, organized by date. I noted the certified mail numbers from the bank letter, adding them to my growing timeline. These weren't just papers anymore, they were ammunition. Lying back on the squeaking mattress, I stared at water stains on the ceiling. They looked like continents on some bizarre map, and I couldn't help but picture Dad sitting at his desk, that beautiful roll-top piece Mom had refinished herself. Was his hand shaking when he signed those papers? Did Carol stand over him, rushing him through documents he couldn't understand? The image hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent enough time wondering, enough time letting my imagination torture me with maybes. Clock on the wall said 8:47 a.m. Banks opened at 9. Time to stop guessing and start investigating. I grabbed my notebook and started a fresh page. At the top, I wrote in block letters, Bennett Estate Investigation, Day 1. Below that, I listed every bank, realtor, and auction house involved in Dad's asset liquidation. Someone in those offices had witnessed all this happening. Someone had documentation, maybe even security footage, and I was going to find them before the business day ended. I'd met Mark Patel during freshman orientation, back when we both thought accounting would be our future. He'd switched to criminal justice sophomore year, but we'd kept in touch through LinkedIn and Christmas cards. These days, he worked private cases with a reputation for being thorough and discreet. Just what I needed. Lauren? His voice crackled through my cell. Been a while. Everything okay? Not really. My throat tightened. Remember those elder fraud cases you worked last year? I think my father's caught in something similar. Silence hummed across the line. Then, meet me at Denny's on 4th. Bring everything you've got. 20 minutes later, I slid into a vinyl booth across from Mark. He hadn't changed much. Same lean build, close-cropped hair going silver at the temples. His suit was understated but sharp, the kind that helped doors open in courthouse hallways. Black coffee, he told the waitress, then turned those observant eyes my way. Start from the beginning. I pulled files from my messenger bag while Mark listened, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, he spread the documents across the table like playing cards. Smart move, printing the social media posts, he murmured, drawing arrows between dates on a legal pad. Timestamps don't lie. But people do, I said, watching him work. The smell of coffee and maple syrup drifted past, reminding me of Sunday breakfast with Dad. He'd always ordered chocolate chip pancakes, even well into his 60s. Mark's pen paused. We need to hit the county recorder's office. These filing speeds aren't normal. The recorder's office occupied the basement level of a brutalist concrete building downtown. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a clerk with reading glasses pulled up transaction records. Yeah, these were rushed through, she confirmed, tapping her screen. Someone paid extra for accelerated processing. Happens sometimes with property management companies. Mark's eyebrow twitched at management. Any other properties handled this way recently? The clerk's fingers flew across her keyboard. 3 others last month, same notary, same mail forwarding service. She turned the monitor our way. Some strip mall place called Pack and Post. I recognized the address, one of those copy and ship stores wedged between a discount furniture outlet and a vape shop. The kind of place you'd rent a mailbox if you didn't want things traced to your home. Mark pulled up security footage from the notary's office on his tablet. The timestamps matched perfectly with Dad's wavering signatures on the transfer documents. My stomach clenched seeing the dates, all after hours, all within days of each other. Batched notarizations, Marky muttered. Classic move when someone's rushing paperwork through. We took the elevator to the parking level as afternoon sun slanted through narrow windows, painting bronze stripes across the metal walls. I was already mentally cataloging next steps when Mark suddenly jabbed the door open button. Wait! He pulled a paper from the stack. Look at this care directive. There it was in black and white. Carol's home address, right below her, flowing signature. The document gave her full authority over Dad's medical decisions. My hands started shaking. She planned this, all of it. Mark's expression had gone flat and hard. She did, and she left us a trail to prove it. You know that moment when scattered puzzle pieces suddenly show you the whole picture? This was mine. Carol hadn't just taken Dad's money. She'd orchestrated a complete takeover of his life, one notarized document at a time. The elevator doors tried to close, but Mark's hand shot out to block them. Afternoon light caught his face as he studied the directive again, and I saw something shift in his eyes. He'd found our first real lead. The medical records hit me like a physical blow. Page after page of clinical observations, each one peeling back another layer of what I'd missed, or maybe what I hadn't wanted to see. Mild cognitive impairment, Mark read from his tablet. Early indicators consistent with developing dementia. He scrolled through the clinic's visit logs, his face grim. First noted 8 months ago. 8 months. I sank into the courthouse bench, remembering Dad fumbling with his house keys last Christmas. He'd laughed it off. Senior moment. And I'd laughed with him, because that's what you do when you're not ready to face harder truths. These cognitive scores, Mark continued, they show a pattern. Minor decline at first, then accelerating around the time Carol started appearing in the records. What does that mean legally? My voice sounded distant in my ears. It means we need to look at capacity. Mark's words carried weight. If he wasn't fully competent when signing those documents, then they might not hold up in court, I finished, The possibility unfurled like a lifeline. We found Elena Ruiz at the Walgreens where Dad had filled prescriptions for years. Her neat pharmacy coat and attentive gaze reminded me of elementary school nurses, the kind who could spot trouble before you admitted it hurt. Yes, I remember Carol, Elena said, checking computer records. She started picking up Richard's medications about 6 months ago. Always had a lot to say about his dosing schedule. My pen hovered over my notebook. How do you mean? She'd correct him when he described symptoms, talk over him about side effects. Elena's mouth tightened. I noted it in his file because it seemed excessive. I wrote down dates, times, prescription changes. Each entry showed Carol's grip tightening. First accompanying Dad, then speaking for him, finally handling everything herself. The pattern was clear as daylight once you knew to look for it. Was there anything else unusual? I asked. Elena hesitated. The last time I saw your father alone, he seemed confused about which medications were new. When I tried to explain, Carol came in and she paused. She said she'd handle his questions from then on. God, how many warning signs had I missed? You'd think a daughter would notice. You'd think, but then, that's how these things work, isn't it? The changes come so gradually, you don't see them until you're looking back. I drove past. Dad's church next, Grace Lutheran, where he'd attended services for 30 years. The heavy wooden doors were locked for the afternoon, but the bulletin board caught my eye. There, among prayer requests for new babies and healing after surgery, I found it. Please pray for clarity and wisdom as Richard makes important life changes. Signed by Carol, dated just weeks before the house sale. The jacaranda tree I parked under dropped purple blossoms on my windshield. They looked like confetti, like celebration, but all I could think was how deliberately Carol had worked to isolate Dad. Each move calculated, each step disguised as concern. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Pattern of coercion," in heavy strokes that almost tore the page. Below it, I listed the evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. A new file appeared in our shared folder. Deadline probate, 30 days.pdf. I opened it and felt my chest constrict. We had 30 days before Carol's control of Dad's estate became permanent. 30 days to prove what she'd done. 30 days to save what remained of my father's independence. I stood in front of that drugstore calendar like it held my future in its cheap paper squares. Maybe it did. With a red Sharpie, I drew thick boxes around 30 days, counting forward from when Carol had filed the estate changes. On day 30, I wrote "probate closes" in letters that practically screamed off the page. "We need every declaration notarized," Mark said, spreading documents across my motel room desk. "Every phone record, every witness statement, every piece of evidence has to be court-ready." I nodded, already dialing Dad's pharmacist. "Elena, I need a formal statement about those prescription changes we discussed. You never realize how many details matter until you're fighting for someone's life. We spent hours recording dates, preserving voicemails, requesting medical records. Mark knew exactly which forms carried weight, which statements needed witnesses, which timing could make or break our case. What about Carol?" I asked, staring at her number on my phone. "Shouldn't I try talking to her first, before this gets ugly?" Mark's expression was careful. "Document the attempt, but don't expect miracles." I hit record on my phone's voice memo app and dialed her number. Each ring felt like an eternity. When her voicemail clicked on, I kept my voice steady. "Carol, it's Lauren. I'd like to discuss Dad's situation and find a solution that works for everyone. Please call me back." 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. One text. "Consult my attorney." "Well," I said to Mark, "that answers that question." We spent the afternoon drafting a preliminary petition to contest the transfers. The legal language felt strange in my mouth. Undue influence, diminished capacity, fiduciary duty. But beneath the jargon lay a simple truth. Someone had taken advantage of my father when he was vulnerable. "We need a specialist," Mark said, pulling up a contact. "Diane Monroe. She's handled dozens of cases like this. tough as nails, but fair. I drafted an email to her while Mark assembled our evidence files. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before I started typing. Ms. Monroe, my father is being financially exploited through undue influence during cognitive decline. I have 30 days to contest several property transfers and establish guardianship. Attached, please find preliminary documentation compiled by P.I. Mark Patel. The vending machine down the hall hummed its midnight song while I worked on my own affidavit. How do you capture a lifetime of knowing someone? How do you explain to strangers that your father would never willingly shut you out? I wrote about Sunday dinners and handwritten notes in cookbooks, about the man who called every week just to share bad dad jokes, about subtle changes in his voice when Carol started answering his phone. The cursor blinked at me like a question mark as I tried to translate love and worry into legal evidence. The desktop clock read 11:42 p.m. when I finally sealed the last certified mail envelope. My hand cramped from signing forms, my eyes burned from scanning documents. But we had a foundation now, a starting point for the fight ahead. 11:57 p.m. I reached for the desk lamp, ready to call it a night. That's when my phone lit up with Mark's call. You need to see this, now. It was just past midnight when I met Mark outside the fluorescent glow of Sunrise Valley Administrative Center. The security guard, clipboard propped against his knee, barely glanced up as Mark flashed some kind of credentials. A tired buzzer groaned, and we were in. You know that feeling when your whole world is about to shift? Like you're balanced on a knife's edge between before and after? That's how it felt walking those empty halls, our footsteps echoing off linoleum that had seen better days. Look at this, Mark said, sliding a paper across. A reception counter that smelled of coffee and printer toner. Transfer authorization, signed last Tuesday. My hands weren't quite steady as I read the document. Bright Harbor Care? The address matched that strip mall mailbox store where Carol received her mail. The same place she'd been routing all Dad's paperwork through. My stomach clenched. He's here? I pressed my palm against the glass partition separating us from the receptionist, who'd clearly rather be anywhere else at this hour. I need to see Richard Bennett. I'm his daughter. She tapped her keyboard with the enthusiasm of a sleepwalker. I can only allow visits from the approved list. Let me check. Remember waiting for test results? Or sitting through endless airport delays? This was worse. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, marking each second like some kind of institutional metronome while she scrolled through whatever was on her screen. There's a visitor's window, she finally offered. Down that hall, third door on the right. I practically ran, Mark's steady footsteps behind me. The hallway stretched forever, every door identical until... there. Through the window, I saw him. My father. My heart stopped. He looked smaller somehow, slumped in a vinyl recliner facing a mounted TV. The volume was loud enough that I could hear game show contestants through the glass. But it was his eyes that hurt the most. Vacant, fixed on the screen like it was his only anchor to reality. I knocked softly, watching him. He was wearing a sweater I didn't recognize, his collar slightly askew. Dad, I mouthed through the glass. I'm here. A nurse appeared from somewhere, clipboard in hand. Her smile was practiced, professional. I'm sorry, but I can't allow interaction without authorization from his designated contact. Let me guess, I said, my voice tight. Carol? The nurse nodded. Ms. Whitman has strict instructions about visitors. Something snapped inside me then. Not loudly, more like a quiet click, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. I watched my father through that window, saw how his hands trembled slightly as he reached for a cup of water. Remembered how he used to grip his coffee mug every morning, steady as a rock while reading his paper. The sunlight hit me like a physical thing when we walked out. My mouth tasted like pennies, that metallic tang of fury and fear mixed together. Mark waited, patient as always, while I found my voice. I turned to him, and 4 words changed everything. Get me a lawyer, now. Have you ever felt rage and love tangle up together? That's what burned in my chest, watching Mark nod and pull out his phone. Carol thought she'd won by hiding my father away, but she just made her biggest mistake. Sometimes the people who think they're most clever leave the clearest trail of breadcrumbs, and I was done following them one by one. It was time to see the whole pattern and tear it apart. I spent that night in Mark's office, the kind of place where determination smells like coffee and printer ink. We spread everything across his desk: medical records, bank statements, transfer docs, building what he called an emergency guardianship packet. Every page went into a fresh binder, each tab color-coded and indexed. You ever watch one of those crime shows where they build the caseboard with strings and photos? This was like that, except our villain wore sensible shoes and carried a power of attorney instead of a weapon. "Timestamps matter," Mark said, organizing the affidavits from Dad's neighbors. "We need to show the progression, how she isolated him when the cognitive decline started, every instance she blocked access." My hands shook a little as I copied Dad's medical notes. Those sterile descriptions of his confusion, his growing dependence on Carol, they hit different at 3 a.m. under fluorescent lights. I remembered how he used to quote Shakespeare at breakfast, his voice warm and sure over eggs and coffee. Now he couldn't remember, which shows he liked to watch. "Dr. Kim's office opens at 8, I said, checking my phone for the 100th time. "He's our best shot at proving Dad's current capacity." Mark nodded, sealing another envelope. "I've worked with him before. Solid reputation with the courts." The sun was barely up when we parked outside the medical center. Dr. Harold Kim met us in his office, review notes already spread across his desk. His hands were steady as he wrote the affidavit, each word chosen with careful precision. "In my professional opinion," he read aloud, "Mr. Bennett's cognitive impairment makes him vulnerable to undue influence and financial exploitation." He looked up at me. This should help the judge understand the urgency. By noon, we had his signed statement, formal letterhead, notary seal, everything the court would need. The courthouse steps felt steeper than usual as I carried that binder, now heavy with evidence and hope. "Emergency guardianship petition," I told the clerk, sliding the paperwork across the counter. "Vulnerable adult claim." She stamped the forms with practiced efficiency. "Judge Matthews reviews these personally." She handed me a yellow slip. "Hearing set for next Tuesday." That's when I saw them, Carol and some sharp-suited lawyer, stepping out of the elevator. She caught my eye and smirked. Just a little. Lift at the corner of her mouth, like this was all some game she'd already won. You know what's funny? That smirk actually helped. It cleared away any doubt, any second thoughts about what I had to do. I watched the process server approach them right there in the lobby, legal papers in hand. Carol's smirk vanished as she was served notice. "Proof of service sent to Diane Monroe," Mark confirmed, typing on his phone. Diane had agreed to represent me the moment she saw our evidence. She says the judge is reviewing now. I found a bench under this massive old fig tree in the courthouse square. The wind picked up, ruffling papers as I read the preliminary order. My heart actually skipped when I saw it. Carol would have to appear with complete financial records. Every transaction, every transfer, all of it exposed to sunlight. The red boxes on my calendar, 30 days counting down to probate, closure, seemed to pulse in my mind. But now we had traction. Now we had a judge's signature compelling Carol to explain herself. A reporter appeared next to my bench, notebook in hand. "Ms. Bennett, care to comment on the emergency guardianship petition?" I closed the binder, watching the courthouse clock tick closer to next week's hearing. We had the evidence, we had the timeline. Most importantly, we had the truth. The fig tree's shadows danced across the preliminary order in my hands. Carol thought she could hide what she'd done in paperwork and process, but some things can't stay buried, not when someone's willing to dig deep enough to find them. Ever notice how courtrooms smell like furniture polish and fear? I'd spent enough time in them during my divorce to recognize that blend, but this morning it hit different. This wasn't about ending something. It was about getting Dad back. Mark touched my elbow as we entered Probate Court 3B. "Remember," he whispered, "let the evidence do the talking." I nodded, settling into the front row with our color-coded exhibits spread before me. Judge Matthews studied the room over reading glasses, her gaze landing on each face like she was memorizing details for later. When she looked at me, I met her eyes straight on. Maybe she saw something there. Determination, desperation, or just raw certainty, because she gave me the smallest nod before turning to Carol's attorney. "Mr. Harding," she said, "your client was ordered to produce complete financial records. Are they present?" Harding cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we have preliminary—" "Yes or no, counsel?" I watched him shuffle papers, buying seconds. "We require additional time to compile." Fortunately, Judge Matthews cut in. The forensic accountant completed his review of the records we subpoenaed directly from the institutions. She gestured to a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Chen, please summarize your findings." Chen approached the podium with a laptop and projection screen. "Following the money revealed a clear pattern," he began, clicking through transaction maps. "Funds from Mr. Bennett's accounts were transferred through a series of shell companies, each registered to Carol Weber's P.O. Box. Address. Similar movements appear in accounts belonging to 3 other seniors who granted Ms. Weber power of attorney between 2021 and 2023. The word embezzlement surfaced in his testimony like a shark fin breaking water. My hands went ice cold as I gripped the edge of the table. You know that moment when scattered puzzle pieces suddenly show the whole picture? This wasn't just about Dad anymore. I passed our exhibits forward. The bank letter, announcing Carol's takeover, the suspect care directive, everything bracketing the timeline of Dad's declining independence. Judge Matthews examined each document, her expression growing stonier by the page. "These transfers," she said, "exhibit multiple badges of fraud, rapid liquidation, isolation of the principal, redirected communications." She looked directly at Carol, whose jaw flexed like she was grinding teeth. "Ms. Weber, did you believe these activities would go unnoticed?" Carol's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge held up one finger. The courtroom fell so quiet, I could hear the wall clock ticking. My phone buzzed, a text from Mark showing a local news website's tip line. The headline placeholder read, "Elder Financial Abuse Investigation, Multiple Victims." In the gallery behind us, a reporter's pen scratched across paper fast enough to tear it. The forensic accountant's summary landed in front of me, pages still warm from the printer. Numbers don't lie, and these told a story of calculated theft masked as caregiving. Every transaction, every transfer, it was all there in black and white. Judge Matthews closed her binder. "This court will recess for lunch. Rulings will be announced when we reconvene at 2:00. She stood, adding, "I suggest all parties remain in the building." The bailiff called, "All rise," and we stood as the judge exited. Carol's face had gone the color of old paper, her earlier smirk nowhere in sight. In the tense quiet, the wall clock kept counting down minutes until everything would change. My exhibits sat ready, the accountant's report waited to be entered into record, and somewhere in a care facility across town, Dad was waiting too, even if he didn't know it yet. Every breath in that courtroom felt suspended, between what was and what would be. I caught Mark's eye as he checked his watch. Just 90 minutes until we'd hear the judge's decision. You ever notice how a courtroom after lunch feels different? Like the air gets thicker, heavier with waiting. I sat in that same front row seat, watching the minute hand drag across the clock face, while my heart did double time against my ribs. At exactly 2, Judge Matthews swept back in, her black robe catching air like a sail. The bailiffs all rise barely finished before she started speaking. Having reviewed the extensive documentation, witness statements, and forensic accounting reports, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of exploitation under state elder protection statutes. She looked up, removing her reading glasses. Ms. Weber's authority over Mr. Bennett's assets, accounts, and medical decisions is hereby terminated, effective immediately. My breath caught. Carol's attorney started to stand, but Judge Matthews wasn't finished. Furthermore, given Mr. Bennett's documented cognitive vulnerability and the systematic nature of Ms. Weber's financial misconduct, I am appointing Lauren Bennett as temporary guardian of both person and estate, pending full hearing in 30 days. The words hit like summer rain after drought. I pressed my palms flat against the table to keep them steady. Ms. Bennett, Judge Matthews fixed those eagle eyes on me. Are you prepared to assume these duties immediately? Yes, Your Honor. My voice came out stronger than I expected. She nodded. Bailiff, please provide Ms. Bennett with the guardianship orders and facility compliance directive. She turned toward Carol's side of the room. Ms. Weber, you will ensure Bright Harbor Care facilitates immediate access and transfer. Procedures for Mr. Bennett. Any interference will result in contempt charges. Is that understood? Carol's throat worked as she swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. The bailiff approached with a stack of documents. The pen scratched loud as thunder in the quiet while I signed where he pointed. Guardian of person and estate. Just like that, I had legal authority to protect Dad from everyone who'd tried to erase him from his own life. This court retains jurisdiction, Judge Matthews concluded. The temporary order remains in force pending further hearing. We're adjourned. The gallery rustled as people stood. I gathered my papers with hands that barely shook, hyper-aware of Carol's stare burning holes in my back. Let her look. The time for hiding was over. In the marble corridor outside, Mark read through the order twice, his expression shifting from careful to satisfied. This is comprehensive, he said finally. Judge Matthews didn't leave any loopholes. I was already pulling up Bright Harbor's number on my phone. A woman answered on the second ring. This is Lauren Bennett, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. I've just been appointed guardian for Richard Bennett by court order. I need to arrange his immediate transfer. There was a pause, some keyboard clicking. Yes, we received the judge's directive by fax. We can process the discharge by 5 today, if that works for you. I'll be there at 4:30. I ended the call and checked my phone's calendar app. Those red countdown squares I'd drawn suddenly looked softer, less threatening, like they'd lost their power to make my stomach clench. I slipped the signed order into my jacket pocket, already mentally listing what we'd need. Dad's medications, current care notes, transfer papers. My phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Bennett? A woman's crisp voice. Sandra Martinez from the Chronicle. We're developing a story on financial exploitation of seniors in care facilities. Would you be willing to comment on today's ruling regarding Carol Weber? Our sources indicate similar cases may be linked to her activities. I caught Mark's eye. He gave me a slight nod. We'd discussed this possibility. The truth needed sunlight. Just then, the courthouse doors swung open. Carol emerged with her attorney, head high but shoulders tight. She saw me on the phone and faltered mid-step. I watched her face as I answered the reporter. Yes, I'll comment on record, but first I need to bring my father home. The fluorescent lights at Bright Harbor Care buzzed like angry wasps as I pushed through the security doors, court order gripped tight in my hand. The receptionist started her usual authorized visitors-only spiel, but I slid the papers across her desk before she could finish. I'm Lauren Bennett. The court appointed me guardian 30 minutes ago. She scanned the document, eyes widening. Let me get Nurse Martinez. A few minutes later, a woman in purple scrubs approached, relief softening her tired face. Thank God, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. We've been worried. Come with me. You know that feeling when something's been wrong for so long that right feels strange? That's how it hit me, following her down that antiseptic hallway. Every step echoed with purpose. Dad sat in the same chair by the window where I'd spotted him before, remote loose in his lap while Wheel of Fortune flashed silent colors across his face. I knelt beside him, my hand gentle on his arm. Dad? It's Lauren. He turned slowly, confusion clouding his eyes before recognition sparked like a match catching. Lauren? His voice rasped from disuse. They said, Carol said. I know what she said. I kept my tone soft, steady. But I'm here now, and we're leaving together. Would you like that? A small nod, but firm. Sure as sunrise. Nurse Martinez helped gather his few belongings while I worked through the discharge paperwork. Someone had left the lobby TV on, tuned to the local news. I caught the anchor's voice over the scratch of my pen. Breaking news in a developing story of elder financial abuse. Local woman Carol Weber faces mounting allegations of systematic exploitation. My hand stilled as security footage showed Carol power walking from an office building, jacket pulled high around her face. The crawl beneath read, "Predatory friend exposed, multiple victims suspected." That lady wasn't nice, Dad murmured beside me, and something in my chest cracked and healed at once. No, she wasn't. I signed the final form, but she can't hurt anyone else now. The evening air hit sweet and clean as we stepped outside, Dad leaning on my arm. A few stars had pushed through the city haze, and he tilted his face up to them like he used to do on our old stargazing nights. I helped him into the passenger seat of Mark's borrowed sedan, tucking a blanket around his knees. He patted my hand once, twice, the gesture so familiar it stung. "Home?" he asked. I started the engine, thinking of the dark house we'd lost, of motel rooms and temporary spaces. "I've got a better place for tonight. Mark helped me find you a nice apartment, just until we figure things out." We drove past our old street anyway, slowing as the house came into view. The porch light still burned, casting shadows across unfamiliar curtains. Dad squeezed my hand. "It's okay," he said, and for the first time, I believed him. The apartment complex sat quiet under maple trees, their leaves silver in the streetlights. I helped Dad up the walkway, key ready in my hand. Inside, the rooms waited bare but clean, a blank canvas, not an ending. The empty mantel caught my eye as I guided Dad to his chair. Tomorrow we'd fill these walls with photos, with proof that some things couldn't be erased. But tonight, watching Dad sink into soft cushions, with a contented sigh, I understood that home wasn't always where you expected to find it. "Lauren?" Dad's voice drifted drowsy. "Thank you for finding me." My throat tightened. On the muted TV, Carol's face flashed again beneath damning headlines, but I barely noticed. I was too busy watching my father's eyes drift closed, peaceful for the first time in months. I crouched beside Dad's chair, adjusting the throw blanket around his shoulders. His breathing had settled into that familiar soft rhythm, the one that used to drift down our old hallway during his Sunday afternoon naps. The dim light from the corner lamp cast gentle shadows across his face, and for a moment, I saw echoes of the strong, steady man who'd taught me to change a tire in our driveway. "Rest easy," I whispered, though he was already deep under. Behind the recliner sat a stack of moving boxes Mark had helped retrieve from a storage unit, the few personal items Carol hadn't managed to simplify away. The top one bore my hurried Sharpie scrawl. "Photos. Keep." You ever notice how cardboard boxes smell different when they're holding memories? This one had that musty sweet scent of old paper and wood frames. My hands knew exactly which item to find first. The portrait from my 16th birthday, the last one with all three of us. Mom's hand rested light, but sure on Dad's shoulder, her smile bright against her already thinning face. Dad stood straight-backed and proud in his Sunday suit. And there I was, grinning like I had all the answers, my new driver's license probably burning a hole in my pocket off camera. The glass had collected a fine film of dust. I pulled my shirt hem up and worked careful circles until our faces shone clear again. The frame felt solid in my hands. Real mahogany, Mom's choice. She always said important things deserved proper housing. Walking to the mantel, I positioned the frame dead center, adjusted it a hair left, then right, then left again until it faced the room just so. Like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog, Mom used to say about family photos. They show you the way home. My phone buzzed. Diane Monroe's office number. "Lauren, good news. We've filed the follow-up petitions. Every account Carol touched is frozen pending review. The banks have your guardianship order on file, and they're cooperating fully with the forensic team. I sank onto the couch, tension unknotting between my shoulders. Thank you, Diane. Any word on Carol? Better than we hoped. The state licensing board just opened an ethics investigation into her senior care credentials. And the DA's office. She paused, and I could hear her smile. Let's just say the grand jury packet is already being prepared. The news coverage didn't hurt. The same coverage that had branded Carol a predator in 40-point font. The same story running on every local channel, ensuring no senior in 3 counties would trust her again. Sometimes, justice wears a press badge. Perfect, I said, meaning it. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet, watching Dad sleep. His hand twitched now and then, dreaming maybe of better days. Or maybe just processing all the changes like I was. The apartment felt different now with the photo up. Less temporary, less like a way station and more like, well, not home exactly. Not yet, but something closer to it than we'd had in months. I stood and walked back to the mantel, touching the frame's corner one last time. The glass caught my reflection, layering it ghost-like over my teenage self. Both of us smiling now, for different reasons. Carol had tried to erase us, erase our history, our connections, our very presence in Dad's life. She'd nearly succeeded, too, with her talk of simplifying and her careful isolation. But she'd forgotten something critical. Family roots grow deep, and when you try to cut them, sometimes they grow back stronger. I looked at Mom's face in the photo, at her hand anchoring Dad steady. Then at Dad himself, sleeping peaceful in his chair, free from Carol's web of lies. The portrait stood like a declaration. We were here. We survived. We won. Because that's the thing about consequences. They always come due. Carol learned that in front of the cameras, in the courthouse, in the ruins of her reputation. She'd wanted power over other people's stories. Instead, she'd lost control of her own. I settled back onto the couch, letting out a long breath. No one, I whispered to the quiet room, erases family without consequences.